Hi everybody, my name is Ian McLaughlin and I have a PhD in neuroscience from the University of Pennsylvania. My research focused on the neurobiology of addiction and anxiety. And for those of you who celebrated, I hope you had a lovely Thanksgiving. And the topic I assume was on everybody's mind, or maybe still is on everybody's mind, is why do we get sleepy after eating our Thanksgiving meal? Some people likely suggest that, it's just because we eat all that turkey and basically it's like eating a big meaty sleeping pill. But others might suggest that it's because the wine or the beer that some people imbibe during Thanksgiving, which probably isn't too far off, by the way. But some might argue that it's because we're exhausted by all the political arguments that we had because of the wine or beer that we imbibed. But I think probably one of the most common Thanksgiving myths that's used to explain why we get tired at the end of Thanksgiving is we get a massive dose of tryptophan from all that turkey, and that's what lulls us into sleepiness. And as far as myths go, it's a pretty reasonable one, particularly when explained by people who are aware that tryptophan is an amino acid that's critical to the synthesis of the neurotransmitter serotonin. And so, in other words, tryptophan is like a building block of a ton of things, including, both protein in general, like muscle protein, as well as the neurotransmitter serotonin. It's an essential amino acid, meaning that it's one of the amino acids that our bodies can't synthesize on its own. However, the only reason people who aren't incorrigible neurochemistry nerds are even aware of tryptophan is because it's the precursor to serotonin. And before I took the dive into neuroscience, I knew that serotonin was one of the neurotransmitters I found intriguing, right? Particularly because of the role it plays in neuropharmacology. However, I think it's worth recognizing that the serotonin molecule was first identified from studies of vasoconstriction, meaning the tightening of blood vessels in the 1930s and 1940s. So, nothing related to mood or sleep or really anything directly related to consciousness. So, these roles, these initial discovered roles, might give you a sense of how serotonin is involved in a super wide variety of biological processes. It's not, in other words, it's not just like the sleepy or happy neurotransmitter. It's involved in a ton of biological processes, and most certainly is not the reason we get sleepy after eating an unusual amount of turkey specifically. And there's no reason to expect that, more tryptophan would make us, happier or sleepier or really have any significant effect on how you feel at all, assuming that you're consuming normal amounts of tryptophan. So I had to stop myself from spending at least 30 minutes talking about both the history of serotonin, some reviews of which I gathered, but suffice it to say that there's nothing special about turkey, turkey meat that makes you sleepy. Pretty much any source of protein, when consumed in the amount of food that you likely consume during Thanksgiving, or any similar ceremonial large meal, right? From turkey to beef, chicken, salmon, soybeans, eggs, dried Atlantic cod, they all have the same ballpark of tryptophan content. Not exactly the same, of course, but pretty similar. And by the way, turkey isn't even the protein that has the densest delivery of tryptophan of all the proteins I named, right? So egg whites, Atlantic cod, and raw soybeans all evidently have higher concentrations of tryptophan, as you can see here. And then, turkey, chicken, beef, salmon, and lamb all have pretty similar concentrations of tryptophan. So all this to say that, diet, this is I'm not arguing that diet has no significant effect on tryptophan, of course. A study in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition that was published in 2003 basically showed that, the intuitive answer to whether meals with a ton of protein in them crank up tryptophan levels is the correct one. The answer is yes. However, the effects of dietary carbohydrates on how much of that tryptophan you're eating from basically any protein source, the effects are not as simple as you might think. I remember when I first learned this in college, I was a little bit mind blown because carbohydrates, we're talking about, things like stuffing, potatoes, pies, whatever, cause an insulin spike. And, the ratio of different kinds of amino acids, things like tryptophan, tyrosine, the precursors to serotonin and dopamine, respectively, to other things like, other amino acids, like branched chain amino acids, that ratio changes. And that change in the ratio basically reduces concentrations of branched-chain amino acids and tryptophan, but it reduces plasma tryptophan less than it reduces BCAAs or branched-chain amino acids. So as a result, the brain ends up seeing more tryptophan. So could this help to drive the sleepiness that we experience? It's possibly part of the story, but there's just nothing special about turkey in doing so. So if it's not that turkey has an unusually high concentration of tryptophan, which it doesn't, what could it be? It might simply have more to do with the fact that we have a tendency to eat several helpings of a bunch of real protein, along with normal distributions of other amino acids and carbohydrates and fats at Thanksgiving, rather than just turkey being this like magical sleeping pill that comes in the form of meat. So in other words, it's we're likely just experiencing something called postprandial somnolence, that sort of drowsy feeling that people can tend to experience after pretty much every large meal. And so as always, there's more to this than just like one mechanism. But perhaps the easiest to grok is just that a large meal forces activation of the parasympathetic nervous system rather than the sympathetic nervous system. And so you're just kind of like driven to take it easy and rest rather than experience those like fight or flight motivations and arousal. Okay. So this is a whole topic that involves like the effects of just like caloric overload on cognition and energy. But suffice it to say that overeating pretty much at any time will get you nice and sleepy, assuming that it's a meal with like a serious amount of protein along with foods that'll cause insulin levels to stay high. So turkey and mashed potatoes is just that kind of meal. But the same would go with like a pot roast or steak or fish or whatever. By the way, that's exactly what happened to me on Thanksgiving night. Like, we had a meal that was pretty over the top, totally accidentally, by the way, because a turkey that was like substantially larger than we thought we would order arrived, and so it was like a pretty soporific feast that we had. And I'm usually pretty bad at sleeping. I slept significantly later and longer than I have in months, and it probably had at least a bit to do with my nearly 2-year-old daughter sleeping unusually long as well, but still, definitely felt like I'd taken like a sedative of some kind, so maybe the solution to my sleep woes is just to eat Thanksgiving meals every night, or probably not. So this is definitely a topic, the relationship that diet has with neurotransmitter levels that I'd like to dive into a bit deeper another time, maybe before Christmas, where at least in my family we have a whole other feast that involves the McLaughlin world famous persimmon bread, which is just life-changing. You'll have to take my word for it. So anyways, a study came out of a lab that actually I referenced in some of my publications that I published while I was working on my PhD out of Peter Kalivas' lab. That explores the relationship between the reward that people experience from recreational drugs compared to the reward people experience from food. So this is a group at the Medical University of South Carolina, or MUSC, as it's informally called, which, I love. My lab almost moved to MUSC, but anyways, I digress. So MUSC, the University of Wyoming, and the University of Colorado in Denver. So once again, why do we care? Because just knowing the track record of a company, just like knowing the track record of a company makes, their track record making like awesome phones or cars or whatever, knowing that track record of scientists helps to get a sense of like the same kind of reputations. Okay, so this was like a pretty creative study. I'm not gonna lie, it's absolutely the kind of study that I would have loved to have done while I was in the lab, and I'll show you a little experiment that I did while I was in the lab that was sort of similar, not quite, but sort of similar at the end here. But so it's another preclinical study, meaning that this is a study working with mice, which is again the kind of research I did. Without getting into the details, it's the kind of study that takes a fair bit of preparation and planning. And so I have like plenty of quibbles with this study, plenty, as always, particularly when it comes to the quantification of their microscopy-based numbers. And I know that's like totally gibberish, but the majority of people who might hear or see this probably don't really care about that, but it's just an example of how scientists interpret new findings. We take in information published by other groups of scientists and we interpret them, with plenty of grains of salt, while we move forward. So all of that said, if I'm being totally fair, it's an interesting study, and it's an interesting idea. And so they came to some interesting findings. So this was a study that focused on figuring out whether the neurons that are involved in seeking drugs, cocaine in this case, are also involved in the pursuit of delicious food, sweet food specifically. So, would the same neurons that drive you to devour the world famous McLaughlin carrot ring at our Thanksgiving table, which is totally understandable, would those same neurons be involved in driving you to seek out cocaine? So fundamentally, this group argues that the neurons in a specific part of the brain, the nucleus accumbens, which is a part of the brain in a region called the ventral striatum, or striatum, people, as always, have multiple pronunciations of the same word, the ventral striatum that receives a ton of dopamine from another part of the brain called the ventral tegmental area, which is very near and dear to my heart. So this schematic is kind of problematic, but it conveys a central idea, right? A part of the brain called the ventral tegmental area, VTA, sends dopamine all the way towards the front of the brain, an area called the nucleus accumbens, or accumbens, as one of my old PIs used to say. So the nucleus accumbens, towards the front of the brain, receives dopamine from the ventral tegmental area, or VTA, which is towards the back of the brain. So why do any of these brain regions matter? Well, these are the brain regions that are central to essentially every single decision you make. They were both involved in your decision, to call or send a text or DM your friend earlier today. They were involved in why you chose whether you ate or what you ate last night instead of like a healthier choice. They'd be involved in why you might devour my world famous carrot ring. They'd be involved in also what makes you have that next beer or that next bourbon. So these, at least to me, are the most interesting parts of our primitive primate brain. The only reason that you've ever heard of dopamine is because of the VTA, the ventral tegmental area, and the nucleus accumbens. The dopamine that's produced in the VTA, when people consume everything from cocaine to ketamine, alcohol to nicotine to oxycodone, is central to what drives people to consume all of those substances in the first place. They were also involved in choices that seem totally trivial, like that moment when you're debating whether you should have another scoop of ice cream or another beer or shot of tequila, is what this group was exploring by probing these dopaminergic neurons. So are those neurons, or are the neurons that determine whether or not you do or don't ingest that next scoop of gelato or apple pie or my carrot ring, are those the same neurons that drive you to have that next glass of wine or shot of vodka or whatever? So quoting Ana-Clara Bobadilla, I assume is how you pronounce her name, assistant professor at the University of Wyoming, we established that in the nucleus accumbens, a key brain region of reward processing, the neural ensembles, a sparse network of neurons activated simultaneously, are reward specific, and sucrose and cocaine ensembles are mostly non-overlapping. So in other words, this group found that activity from the neurons in this specific part of the brain, the nucleus accumbens, or NAC, tended to respond to two different types of rewarding stimuli in largely different ways. So the question is whether we draw, is whether the draw we all experience to eat sweet foods and the draw someone experiences to consume a drug like cocaine is driven by the same exact neurons. And so this team is arguing that different groups of neurons generate the rewarding experiences, we have from different rewarding substances. So, when someone consumes my carrot ring, two different groups of, when someone consumes my carrot ring compared to when somebody consumes cocaine, two different groups of dopamine releasing neurons started firing during those experiences. And obviously the carrot ring is the better choice of the two. But to repeat, this is a preclinical study. And frankly, it's super preliminary. The concept strikes me as totally viable and valuable, I suppose, that there's a distinction between the neurons that respond to something like a recreational drug and the neurons that respond to a delicious food. So this is going to be a story that I'm going to keep an eye on. I really do think that there's something to this argument that, ensembles of dopaminergic neurons respond differently to different forms of rewarding stimuli. And as I said earlier, I can't help myself. I actually did a sort of similar experiment when I was in the lab. And so this is the nucleus accumbens, a picture that I took myself. And it's kind of tough to see, but all those little yellowish spots, within that sea of red, basically, those are neurons that were activated by cocaine. And so, without getting into the weeds, I made a virus that would cause every neuron it infects to turn red, to make red fluorescent protein, or TD tomato. But then, after a neuron is activated, it starts churning out green fluorescent protein. And so I was preparing to compare the patterns of neuronal activation that nicotine induces to the patterns that cocaine induces. So in other words, are they the same ensembles of dopaminergic neurons? And I ended up abandoning the project just because I had so many things that I was trying to do at the same time. But it was a cool little virus, and I just thought I'd share that experiment just because it's like marginally relevant. And I like to think back to my glory days. But anyways, that's what I have for you today. I hope you had a lovely Thanksgiving, and I hope you're staying safe right now. It's definitely still game time right now in pretty much every part of the country when it comes to COVID-19. So, just like I tell my own family, keep wearing masks, keeping distance, and protecting the people that you love. All right, so let's start the live half. I guess I can take this down. Hey, Joy, good to see you. I bet even too much carrot rain can make you sleepy on Thanksgiving. Oh, for sure. I welcome our caloric overlords. Yeah, me too. All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Ian McLaughlin, and I have a PhD in neuroscience from the University of Pennsylvania. And on YouTube, just now, I talked about a study that just came out that compares whether or not the same dopamine receiving and producing neurons respond to cocaine and food, like delicious sweet food, the same way, or are they the same neurons that respond to those two different types of rewarding stimuli. And so you can find that at youtube.com/anthropoid. And I have a bunch of videos like that now. I've been very generously assisted by somebody who's been very, very generous with their time. And so now it's not like the whole, hour and a half. Like there's just like this sort of short little chunks. So you can check that out, youtube.com/anthropoid. And I hope everybody had, well, for those of you who celebrated, I hope everybody had a lovely Thanksgiving. I know I did. I know I overconsumed food. Because we ended up getting a turkey that was like 2 pounds, 2 or maybe more heavier than we thought we had gotten. So we had like way too much turkey. I also talked about the explanation that people have for why we get tired during Thanksgiving or after Thanksgiving meals, and basically, I go into some degree of depth, but I'm sure it's something you've heard of before, right? That it's all that tryptophan in the turkey that makes you sleepy. And there's more to the story than that. Although it's not completely off, like it's not completely wrong, but it's just not the main reason. Okay, was your turkey dry and unseasoned? No, it was seasoned. How dare you? It was a little too dry though. That was my fault. I take total blame for that. So yeah, how's it going, everybody? I wonder if vape till I drop. I love that. Dry and unseasoned. Good. Yes, I agree. Okay. I wonder why they asked that. Dry and unseasoned. Yeah, I don't know. There must be a joke there that I'm not grokking here. But anyways, since it's coming from Irene, we know it's a joke. So yeah. I don't know. Oh, I guess I could talk about. Oh, you know what? Oh, I totally did forget. It was a weird question. Do you know me? Yes, I do. I recognize your name. My memory's pretty bad. It's not that bad though. So let's do this. Boop, boop. So how's it going, everybody? The way you read it. Yeah, Irene, I know who you are. You're like a very ardent troll. But you do a good job. It definitely took me a while to pick that up. I know something you forgot last week. Ooh, what did I forget? Did I forget something? Yeah, what else? Oh, well, yeah, I guess I could talk about, until like somebody might have a topic. So, when it comes to treatments for autism, colorblindness, that's right. T-Bone, good to see you. T-Bones, I'm sorry. T-Bones Mandolins. Tell me that is a brand name. That would be so good. If like that's a brand name of mandolins that you make, I would love that. All right. Well, let's see. Yeah, somebody's calling in. Oh, shoot. Do I have to? All right. Looks like we are connected. What's your name and where are you calling from? Are you there?
Yo. My name is Devon from Washington.
Devon from Washington. Awesome. What's on your mind?
I just joined. I don't know what's going on.
Right on. Okay. Well, if you think of anything, like if you're curious about deja vu or dreams or drugs or dementia, go ahead and call back in. All right. Assalamu alaikum. Malaikum salam, right? I think that's the response. Please excuse my ignorance there. We have another caller. So colorblindness. Do not let me forget that. Okay, looks like we're connected, Layback Dre. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
What's going on, bro? I'm from Miami.
That's right. Yeah, from Miami. Okay, so what's on your mind?
I wanted to ask you a question about like languages. Like, how come there's people out there who are able to remember over 10, 20 languages, and there's some out there who can't even remember the easiest language in the world, which is Spanish, I think.
I guess maybe I guess English is kind of a pain in the butt. There's a lot of rules that don't apply in some cases. Anyway, so I actually grew up, probably the smartest person I've ever met in my life. Ended up going to linguistics, and he can speak like 15 languages or something, including like dead languages. It's very impressive. His name is Morgan. So the reason that he was able to amass all these languages, while I'm like not even that good at my mother tongue English, is because he learned all those languages while he was like in this critical stage where your brain is just like an absolute sponge, and it's just so much easier to learn language when you're younger than when you're older. This is a conversation we had last week, but just because, for a variety of reasons, but the brains of younger people are far more dynamic. They're changing much more rapidly. They're creating new connections between neurons. They're getting rid of old ones much more rapidly. There's even more neurogenesis in some parts of the brain. And so as a result, their brain is able to adapt much more readily to any change in their environment, and that includes education like language. So that would be like the simplest explanation. Of course, memory is complicated. People have different sort of predispositions to different, manifestations of memory, but yeah, that's the main reason. Why? Are you trying to learn a new language?
Yes, I want to learn Spanish because like the only word I know is hola,
Well, you live in Miami. You should be able to speak.
Everyone in Miami, they know Spanish and stuff. And every time I go to the gas station, corner store, the guy, he speaks Spanish, he doesn't speak English. So I have to use my translator. Like, I need change for $10.
Yeah.
Last time I put that in, I think I misspelled something wrong. He looked at me, he was like, "¿Qué?"
¿Cómo? Yeah. What is that? So that would be like cambia para $10. I think that.
There you go. Right. That's exactly that's what the translator said. But yeah, I'm struggling with Spanish, man.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
I still have time because I turned 20 like 4 weeks ago.
You turned. You turned 20? Yeah, for sure. Yeah, just work at it, and like, your brain is the cement is starting to get hard, but your brain is far more dynamic than my brain, for example, where I'm a bit over 30. So, yeah, man, just work at it. And plus, Cuban Spanish is so fast. It's like, it's wild. I used to live in Miami, and Cuban Spanish is just so fast. And then I moved to California, and the Spanish that's spoken there is much slower, calmer, more sort of melodic. But anyways, yeah, man, just work at it.
Yeah, I gotta find me a Cuban girl too, man.
that might help. All right, yeah, good to talk to you, man.
You too, bye.
Layback Dre. Easiest way to learn Spanish. Oh, Euromeister's here. For any of you who have any interest in Europe, just a bunch of things. He has pretty eclectic interests. Check out Euromaestro. Easiest way to learn Spanish is to get a Spanish girlfriend, preferably one that doesn't speak English. Yeah, I've heard that suggestion before as well. I wouldn't be surprised if Euromaestro can speak Spanish. Oh, wow, we're getting a bunch of calls. Sorry about that, everybody. All right, let's start. I believe Daniel called first. So is Daniel your name? And if it is, where are you calling from?
Yeah, my name's Daniel. I'm calling from St. Petersburg.
In Florida?
Yeah.
Okay, right on. What's on your mind?
All right. I've always had this internal compass. I'm 55, and you can drop me anywhere in the country, and I can tell you which way was north, south, just internally. And about a year ago, I suddenly seem to have lost this ability. Now I can drive down the road, and GPS will tell me I'm going east, but in my head, I'm still thinking I'm going west, or I'm going the opposite direction. So it just disappeared like about a year ago. It's very strange.
That's interesting. So So about a year ago. I mean, I can't tell. Obviously, I can't tell you for sure. What might have happened. Of course, in general, cognitive processes, memory, just sort of the whole system that we have does just sort of begin to deteriorate as we get older. Not necessarily at your age, but that's when it sort of it actually begins when you're at my age. But that could certainly be part of it. But like, did something else happen? Did you get into a car accident? Did you have any kind of injury at all?
No, but I am disabled, but I've been disabled for 26 years. I'm a quadriplegic.
Oh, okay. But and was that from a specific accident or?
Yeah, I dove and hit my chest on the bottom of the ocean. There's a sandy bottom, and it snapped my C5 vertebrae.
Jeez. Well, I mean,
it doesn't seem related though.
Yeah, well, the traumatic brain injuries are one of those things where, it's not necessarily as overt as another injury, like the loss of motor control, right? Where it's a very obvious change in capability. Traumatic brain injury can be the kind of thing where you experience it, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, whatever, and you don't really notice until, as the sort of cognitive decline that we all experience begins, happening, you sort of begin to fall below a threshold of capability. So that's oftentimes what can happen with people who are, predisposed to developing dementia or something like that. And I'm not suggesting you are, but it's similar to, like what happens with professional, NFL professional football players, where they have all these, head injuries, and they can be subconcussive. Go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't break my neck by hitting my head.
I understand.
I never had a TBI.
No, I understand. So you don't have to like actually hit your head directly to have a TBI. You can get a TBI from just water skiing or something, and you're just bouncing really hard, right? I'm not suggesting that this is the cause, for sure. And it's just one of the things that, that might influence this capability. But yeah, beyond, I mean, it's also worth acknowledging that like humans, while we do have a sort of a kind of intuitive spatial reasoning capability, it's not like we have something that some birds have, right, where they literally have like lead in a part of or I don't know if it's lead, but it's like a magnetic atom of some kind in a specific part of the brain that literally is like a compass. We don't quite have something like that, and so it's not like it's theoretically comparable to a skill, right, that you either maintain and continue to use, or it might deteriorate. That's another potential explanation, is just there is a sort of use it or lose it component to human consciousness, like language, right? If you don't continue speaking a language, you can just begin to deteriorate until you get to the point where you can't really speak it anymore. But beyond that, I'm purely speculating at this point, Daniel.
No, but that makes sense. I can understand that.
Yeah, well, listen, man. I'm sorry to hear that this capability is declining in you. At least I'm jealous that you even had it in the first place, though, because I am terrible with that kind of internal compass kind of capability. My wife is good at it, but I'm not. So, anyways, that's the best I got for you, Daniel.
All right. Well, thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks for calling. You too. Oops. This is good. All right. Okay. Okay, let's do that. So, Amber, is that your name? And if so, where are you calling from?
Yes, I'm Amber, and I'm calling from West Virginia.
Cool. What's on your mind?
I had a question about a patient of mine. I'm a nurse. I do pediatric. But anyway, we have a non-TBI from a drowning, near drowning. What is the amount of time where somebody has the ability to, regain any kind of brain function? And what is the best? Do you recommend negative pressure? I mean, not negative pressure. What is it? Hyperbaric chamber?
Right. Well, so
It's a child, and she's only 2 years old.
Right. Okay. That's what I was curious about. So I should of course acknowledge that I am not a clinician. I'm not a physician. I'm a scientist.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm just,
Yeah. Just so we're all on the same page. So okay. So first, the first concern is like how much time when somebody is hypoxic, essentially, how much time until neurons begin to deteriorate. It's actually rather quickly. It's just a couple of minutes. And so that depending upon how extensive that hypoxia or how sustained it was, you can have greater or lesser damage, right? Now, of course, as has become sort of a theme today, the brains of younger people are far more dynamic and capable of recovering from an insult like that. They are, well, yeah. So it's non-TBI. So. Okay, so it depends on the extent of the damage. It also depends upon where in the brain that damage has occurred. Different brain regions can respond to therapy in different capacities. When it comes to how much time could it take? It'll vary according to the extent of damage and where in the brain the damage is. In terms of like a hyperbaric chamber, like exposure to high pressure environments, I've read, this is a very tenuous memory, but I've read that there have been some positive clinical outcomes, just in general. I don't recall reading about it in the context of like a near drowning situation. But I'm certainly not in a position to recommend or advocate for any treatment.
And then doesn't it seem like if you have emotional, if you can show emotion, then that same part of the brain, like she can cry, but she doesn't smile or have any kind of happiness,
positive affect.
But she can cry. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I mean it's a totally reasonable intuition where the child is experiencing some kind of emotional processing, right? Emotion is very like disparately regulated, right? Different regions. It's not like you have an emotional center of the brain. Different regions of the different regions of the brain will promote different emotional reactions. Like just to give you a concrete example. One part of the brain called the insular cortex is, sort of far away from other parts of the brain that regulate mood. And the insular cortex is what's responsible for you having disgust reactions to seeing a severe injury or seeing some rotten food or something where you're just like, oh, it's just that negative kind of reflexive reaction. And that is a completely different part of the brain from, let's say, the parts of the brain that become active when you're when you're excited, right? When you're just about when you're just about to eat like a slice of apple pie, or when you have a drink of wine or beer or whatever. Totally different part of the brain. So all this to say that it could be the case that different brain regions were differently affected by that hypoxia, and so some brain regions are still totally fine and intact, and perhaps those that underlie sadness or frustration or are doing okay, whereas the other parts of the brain are still in the process of healing. That's what my assumption would be, but I can't tell you for sure.
All right, I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for calling in, Amber.
Bye.
Cool. Okay, and I should say hi. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. I should say that the baby is thrilled with that toy. It's like a daily thing, and she uses it as a stool when she like sits at. Sometimes I sit at the desk or kitchen table or dining table. It's the same table, and she'll like mimic and use the stool thing as like a little chair, and then pull up a table. She's very adorable. Yeah, she and it's very. I like the. It's well made. Like it's sturdy. I trust it. It's not always the case with children's toys. Euro, it looks like we're connected. So Euro Maestro in, let's say, Paris. What's on your mind today?
Hey, what's up? Actually, this is something I meant to ask you the other day when we were talking about the COVID numbers and stuff. But it's non-COVID related. So I'm just curious. What about someone that suddenly gets vertigo?
What do you mean? Just like what happens in the brain when somebody's experiencing vertigo?
No, I mean like what could be like the cause, like someone that's never had it before, and then like they suddenly have like severe cases of vertigo for no reason, you know?
Yeah, this has come up recently. I can't remember in what context. Now, okay, well, never mind. Yeah, so it's vertigo is like one of those things that can be caused by a variety of different brain regions. Like probably the most intuitive are the vestibular regions, right? Vestibular organs, where for one reason or another you get this sort of sudden dizziness or this like weird kind of spatial awareness of your body. So that can be one cause. It can happen after a traumatic brain injury. It can happen after a stroke. It can variety of these things, right? It can also happen following excessive drug use. So it can be caused by a variety of things. And in terms of like, yeah, I could have sworn maybe somebody brought it up or something, but I couldn't find like a really solid explanation for like sudden onset vertigo, like acute reactions that just come and go, like all of a sudden later on in life. So I'm not sure. There was like another. Now that we're talking about viruses quite a bit more these days, there are like theories where exposure to some pathogen, it could be viral, whatever, and then exposure to it, you get sick, and then you recover. That exposure is thought to potentially have lingering effects, like one of the most severe that I recall reading about was POTS. I don't know if you're familiar with that, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, and vertigo can be a part of that. It can be rather debilitating. But yeah, one of the theories is that people can develop an autoimmune reaction following exposure to some kind of pathogen. And in fact, when it comes to COVID-19, there are some reports of patients developing POTS following COVID-19. POTS is like, it's not necessarily. It's a couple of things. The most sort of direct one is people like find it difficult to stand up and then maintain balance, but it can be associated with a bunch of other maladies. So yeah, I mean there's definitely this lingering effect of being exposed to a pathogen seems to be an intriguing potential explanation, but I haven't seen any like mechanistic explanations for why.
Yeah, I did some quick research online just to try to figure it out.
Oh, awesome.
And it turned out to be a much more complex subject than I ever imagined, because there's all, at least from what I was reading, all different potential causes.
Yeah.
And some of them are very serious, and some of them aren't serious at all, right? So
right.
I guess it's difficult to try to figure out. But one of the ones I was seeing that interested me in the case that I'm looking at is they said that it could also be brought on through dehydration. So that kind of surprised me a little bit, but seemed like a possible likely explanation for the case that I'm thinking about.
Right, and I imagine like this is part of the reason that it can be associated with POTS is like there's just this dysregulation of blood distribution throughout the body, and like all of a sudden the brain can be deprived of enough blood. It's not like there's no blood going to the brain, but it's just not nearly as much as it should be, because blood vessels aren't constricting properly, and so yeah, you can get like dizziness or vertigo, these types of reactions. But yeah, I that was the sense that I developed too.
That's essentially what it was saying, was I guess through the dehydration that it would obviously affect your blood pressure, and that by extension could create a vertigo type response. Yep. And they were saying like particularly like people getting up suddenly and that kind of thing.
Yep. Yeah. That's exactly what we're talking about when it comes to POTS, which is like, yeah, it's one of those conditions that like I suspect is multiple conditions that all can sort of look the same, but they're not necessarily the same. But anyways, yeah, that was the sense that I got, is that there's a bunch of potential causes.
How common is the POTS that you're talking about?
I think, gosh, I saw some numbers that seemed very extrapolated, but millions. Like the numbers that I saw were like millions of people are actually affected by this, And but I didn't jot down those numbers because it did just seem, because it was like a range. It was something like from, you know, like 1 million people to like 20 million people, you know, like it was just this crazy range.
So it's not uncommon then.
No, I mean it's certainly, it's not super common, but it's not like extremely rare.
It's not super rare.
Yeah.
Either. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. Well, thanks a lot. And then, unfortunately, kind of sad news for me is my COVID-19 projections seem to be going the way I projected. That's unfortunate, but hopefully we all get to our senses soon and try to combat this thing. Yeah,
it's definitely getting a little precipitous. Like Philadelphia did quite a good job when it comes to, you know, it could have done better, obviously, but did a good job relative to other like large cities, dense cities. But even now in Philly, like the numbers are nuts. And like our health commissioner has like specifically experience in viral epidemics. And so he was like really prepared and on the ball, but like there's just, you know, once you pass a certain threshold, there's like not many tools available to, you know, unless you want to get a little bit martial. But anyways, yeah, man, it's getting freaky.
Well, Philadelphia is one of the case studies, right, for the 1918 influenza that's often cited. So maybe they've learned something.
Yeah, I'm sure he didn't want to be like, oh, chapter 2 of Philadelphia screwing up an epidemic response.
Exactly.
Yeah, man.
All right. Well, thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks for calling in. Good to talk to you. Okay. So let's. Oh yes, but Temple University students, from what I witnessed, partied and screwed it up. Yeah, I mean, you know, that's I think a little bit baked into this process of how to respond. Like you're always gonna have people that. And it's not even necessarily like malicious or you know, it's just like it's been so many months now that like a lot of behaviors that are just intuitive just happen. Like this happened when my job is now full remote again, but for a while, you know, we were breaking up the composition of the office so that like only like 3 people were ever in. It's a pretty big office. And like the first time somebody came up a more senior position, you know, just to say hi, like my initial reaction was to take off my mask. And I was just like, of course I was sitting in my office and he was outside of my office, but I was still like, as I'm doing it, I'm like, what am I doing? And like, I care about these things. I you know, very fastidious about how we react to COVID and to protect my family. Right. But yeah, so I understand like people, it's not always malicious, but I think at this point, if people are partying, like I can see across the way, there's probably a house of college kids, and you know, they were like playing beer pong and stuff. At least it was outside, but like, come on, guys, like really, was that beer pong really worth it? A partner of a friend died of COVID yesterday. Still trying to process how pervasive. Oh, geez, pervasive and damaging it is. Yeah, I mean, the numbers are getting really nuts. Like, yeah. It's game time. Again, it's game time no matter where you are. Okay, could it be ear issues? Yeah. Oh, wait, somebody's calling in, I think. Yes, and we could talk about colorblindness and then focus without Adderall. I'm going to write down colorblindness. I'm so sorry, Joy. All right, looks like we're connected. What's your name and where are you calling from?
Hello, I'm Robert, and I'm calling from Switzerland.
Robert in Switzerland. Very cool. What's on your mind?
I have a question. I was diagnosed last week with lesions of the grey matter.
Okay.
In layman's terms, what is it? Because I was diagnosed in Italian. My Italian's very good, but technically I lose some things.
Sure.
What's the layman terms for that?
So, if you'll have to forgive me if I'm mishearing you, but lesions, right? Lesions of gray matter. Right. Yeah. So basically, what that's a very like broad description. So you don't necessarily know what's causing these lesions. What lesions are is just an anomaly or an abnormality in tissue, right? And so you can have, you know, and you can see this when I assume they did something like an MRI of your brain.
Yes.
Yeah. So what you can see, you know, we know what a brain normally looks like. When you know, take an MRI, you have different anatomical regions, different like shapes that everybody's brain pretty much has. But then you also have gray matter and white matter. So the main difference between gray matter and white matter is gray matter are like the actual neurons, like the cell bodies of the neurons, whereas the white matter is basically is the connections between neurons. And so you can have lesions in white matter, or you can have lesions in gray matter, or both. Like one example would be like multiple sclerosis or Guillain-Barré, where you would see in white matter some lesions. But so gray matter lesions would suggest there's something going wrong. It could be a stroke. It could be multiple strokes. It could be some form of neurodegenerative condition beginning. But basically what is that there are some abnormalities in the parts of the brain that are where neuronal cell bodies actually reside.
Okay. More or less, I think I understood in Italian then.
Yeah. So
More or less, you said it.
It's not a very like they didn't give you like this is Lewy body dementia, or
Correct.
yeah, they just it's basically like if you went to the hospital, it looks like you're a cycler. Like you went to the hospital with a broken leg, and because you fell, and they just say you have a broken leg, right? It's not like the cause of the broken leg or anything like that. But anyways, yeah, best of luck, Robert. I mean, hopefully you'll be able to receive. I'm sure you have actually access to some pretty good healthcare in both Switzerland and in Italy. So hopefully you receive some top-notch.
Italy's a disaster.
Is it a disaster? Italy has like a pretty good health system. Obviously not right now, but
No, never.
really.
I once broke my arm in Italy and drove home with one arm into Switzerland just so I wouldn't go to a hospital in Italy.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's not the reputation it has. But listen, I take your word for it.
Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah. Thanks for calling, Robert. Good luck.
Thank you.
In Switzerland, I have seen Switzerland. I've never been. I guess I have been to Switzerland. Lake Como. Like it's an absurd. It's like out of the Lord of the Rings. It's so beautiful there. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm so behind, everybody. Trending neurodoc. Oh, okay. So, colorblindness. Colorblindness is an interesting phenomenon. It arises. There's different forms of colorblindness. So let's like characterize the basics of human color vision, right? The reason that we can see colors is that we have different photoreceptors in our eye that are sensitive to different wavelengths of light. Different photons have different wavelengths, and so one wavelength is going to look like blue, another wavelength will look like red, and another will look like green. And those are the three main photoreceptors that we have that are sensitive to those colors of light. They're called cones. And there's some interesting stuff like the area of your eye where when you focus on something, right, you can see, like I can see my fingers. You can't see my fingers. Like I can see my fingers out of the sides of my eyes, the sides of my vision. But I can't really discern, which fingers are moving, how many fingers are moving, how quickly they're moving. I just know that there's movement. Whereas when the thing I'm focusing on, which are your comments, that's where a specific part of the eye called the fovea is pointed. It's a little region of the eye, and that is where the densest expression or collection of these photoreceptors are. So you have the best color vision right where you're focused on. It's actually, you have the greatest distribution of blue cones, essentially blue photoreceptors. Fun fact. Anyways, so yeah, there's different kinds of color blindness, and I can't remember specifically what the colors are. I think it's like red-green color blindness, or then blue-green or something, blue-red. I can't remember, but different combinations. And colorblindness tends to happen. It can happen in women, but it's significantly more common in men. Because at least some of the genes that can affect colorblindness are on the X chromosome. And so women, of course, have two X chromosomes. I have an X chromosome, which I bequeathed to my daughter. She got and so you get an X chromosome from both your mother and your father, from the male and the female. And so my daughter was unlucky to inherit my X chromosome. I'm sure she would have been much happier with both of my wife's X chromosomes. But anyways, so if you have one form of a gene on one X chromosome that predisposes you to color vision, then you'll have this other backup as a woman, right? As a female. Whereas for men, you only have one X chromosome. So you get what you get. And so, yeah, that's pretty much it. Oh, and, there's some interesting devices that are coming out recently, like designed to help people who are colorblind see colors. And, I was quite skeptical. Basically what they are they're just like glasses that have like certain certain filters of light, so that they basically like change the ratio of how much of different, wavelengths of light. So it's like, instead of just having blue, green, and red, you'll have like blue, green, and red, right? So you see way more blue or whatever, whatever color is deficient. I was skeptical of those devices, but evidently, I've heard from people who are colorblind that like, yeah, they did something for sure. Of course, you have all those corny videos of like people putting them on and then beginning to like weep. I'm saying they're corny just because like there's so many of them now. But hey, that's meaningful anecdata. So, anyways, all right. I don't know if any of those things were what was interesting to you, Joy, but hopefully we at least touched on one of the things that was interesting. Thank you very much. I've had this shirt ever since I moved to Texas. Lived in Texas. Yeah, I got one of these shirts, and then the next day from this like store in Houston, and I was like, I love this shirt. And this is just a jean shirt or denim or whatever, but the other ones are like this so thin, this like spiderweb thin fabric that is just so nice. And that Texas heat in Philly can get pretty hot too. So I immediately went to the store and got like, give me all of them, give me all color combinations. So yeah, I used to wear them so much. Okay. Can animals see colors like humans? That's a great topic. So first of all, like, yes. However, different animals have different, how we were talking about, like, humans can see color because we have these cones, these red, green, blue cones. And so that enables us, that basically defines our color landscape, right? We can't see, we don't experience like ultraviolet, or we don't experience, other, the visible light spectrum is this very, very small sliver of the electromagnetic spectrum that includes things like gamma rays, X-rays, microwaves, radio waves, Wi-Fi, cellular, Bluetooth, right? All of those fall along this spectrum of the EM spectrum. Visible light is just one little sliver, and so we happen to have these photoreceptors. The only reason that we know that there's light around us, that we're being bombarded with these photons, is because we have those photoreceptors. So we don't have a photoreceptor. Let's say this is the sliver of visible light. We don't have a photoreceptor for right over here on the EM spectrum, so we don't even know it's there. Like, you don't even know that there's radio waves around you, even though they're pretty much always constantly around you. But you could theoretically see radio waves if you had a specialized protein devoted to it. So other animals. So other animals will have different combinations of photoreceptors, different combinations of things like cones. And so, dogs, for example, I remember growing up, there was this, sort of folk fact that dogs are colorblind, and they're actually not colorblind, but they don't have as diverse a collection of colors that they can see. I think they see something like yellow and like orange and like blue or something kind of strange like that. And other animals have, lesser or greater sort of color sensitivities. My favorite, this is the coolest one when it comes to animals seeing colors, is the Mantis Shrimp. The Mantis Shrimp can see so many colors, and they're beautiful. Like if you look at a Mantis Shrimp, they're those like crazy shrimp that like look like they're dressed like from Cirque du Soleil or something, and they also have this crazy punch. Like the amount of force that they can generate with this little punch thing that they have from one of their claws is like dramatic. But anyways, they can see so many more colors than we can because they have more photoreceptors. There are some humans who are born, typically females, who are tetrachromats, because they have an extra photoreceptor that's sensitive to a slightly different part of the red spectrum of color. So they can see like many, they can, really what it means is that they can distinguish colors that to you or me would look identical, like two shades of red, really, where, I look at them and I'm like, that's burgundy and that's also burgundy. And for them, they'd be like, that's burgundy and this is like lighter or, darker burgundy. So kind of cool, sort of like a superpower. All right. And it's good to see you, Abyss. Thanks for joining, man. All right, let's see. What do we got here? Can constant daily migraines be a side effect of something bigger? Yes. So migraines are one of those things that has, a very diverse set of causes. And as a result, like no single treatment is effective for all cases of migraines. And migraines can be caused by basically like there's sort of like two buckets of headaches in general, and of course migraines fall into this category, where there's like I can't remember what the term is. It's like a primary cause and a secondary cause, something like that. And a primary, one set is induced by an injury of some sort, like a direct, insult to the head, a traumatic brain injury or something like that, that can cause migraines, recurring migraines. And the reason that they're distinct from the other group is that migraines can also be essentially benign. They can be very unpleasant, and they're debilitating, but they're not they're not caused by some underlying disorder or disease. That version that's the primary collection of migraines, is like the sort of benign, recurring, but not caused by any kind of underlying disease or disorder. Whereas the secondary is less common. It can be brought on by an infection. It can be brought on by a vascular disorder, by bleeding, by tumors, right? Those are like the diseases or disorders that we're talking about when it comes to what distinguishes these collections of migraines. So yes, and there's different kinds of migraines. Of course, there's like cluster headaches that are essentially like migraines, but they tend to be a little bit more focal. They tend to actually be around like the eye, specifically one eye, oddly. And there's a bunch of different potential causes. There's like irritation of the meninges, in vascular, like meningeal vasculature, nociceptors, pain receptors being stimulated by something or another. CGRP is sort of central. Theoretically, it may be central to that cluster of headaches, that cluster of migraines, which is why we now have two treatments that are pretty new, that have recently come out, which is Aimovig, and I can't remember the other one. Of course, it's not Aimovig. It's not Remegapant. It's something like that. Anyways, they both target CGRP. Yeah. Let's see. What am I forgetting? There's something else I'm forgetting. As always. All right. So yeah. For a long time, and I used to answer this way, migraines were thought to be essentially a vascular disorder, where the blood vessels around your meninges just like got too big or too small for no good reason, and that's actually essentially it's become outdated. Like we know that it's not that simple. But part of the reason for why we thought that's what caused migraines is because the most effective drugs we had at our disposal, the tryptophan drugs, basically regulated vasculature. And so they were effective for some people, which suggests that indeed, at least part of these, at least for some people, a vascular cause is at the heart, but we're not entirely. But we know that doesn't explain all of them. All right. Cool. Getting a call from Abyss. Our neighborhood Abyss. Friendly neighborhood Abyss. Cool. It looks like we're connected. So, this is Abyss. We know him. We love him. What's on your mind?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes. You sound a little tinny, but it's fine. I can understand.
I mean, it took longer than I expected to connect, so I wasn't so sure if my call actually went through. So I was able to catch some part of the conversation that you had with Euro, and have you heard of anything about cerebral autoregulation?
So you mean specifically autoregulation of blood delivery to?
Right. So what happens is that when the intracranial pressure is actually reduced, then the arteries that are supplying, the carotid arteries that are normally supposed to supply blood to the brain would increase in size so that they can have more blood flow and kind of regulate the pressure. So this is the sort of the trade-off between the blood flow and the cerebral perfusion pressure. So it has to be maintained constant for a certain amount of duration, or for a certain amount of pressure ranges. So what happens is that, especially I believe this is also common among COVID patients that have recovered, is that there's a greater chance for red blood cells to actually coagulate, right? So that's why there's more risk of stroke or any kind of
right.
a blood vessel blockage when you have COVID, and this is symptomatic to sickle cell disease patients, which normally have the genetic tendencies to have that kind of clustering of RBCs. So what happens is that, say for example, when you get up, like when you kind of instantly get up,
right.
Most of the people get lightheaded and then function normally, like within seconds, right?
Yep.
But that's not common for sickle cell disease patients. They actually take some time. In fact, like they can be thrown off into vertigo or any kind of like vestibular imbalance.
Interesting. I didn't know that. Huh.
Right. So my theory, I mean, I could be wrong here, but if I have to associate it, is that since COVID patients, or at least like the ones that recovered, behave similar to what sickle cell disease patients have, like, which is like, although like in sickle cell patients it's more genetically induced, that you kind of see this offset of cerebral autoregulation, in which case the blood flow does not match the intracranial pressure or the perfusion pressure that the brain needs. So that would cause some kind of balance issues, or at least
dizziness.
Dizziness and kind of vertigo as well.
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. I didn't know that about sickle cell. That's I mean, it does make sense. But that, interesting, man.
Right. I mean, it's a very interesting idea. Although, like, I'm really glad that there are genetic treatments. I think there are CRISPR-related treatments that kind of treat or remove the components, the protein components that are more sort of coagulative when they come to like in a low pressure situation, because that's one of the problems that you see in sickle cell patient disease. Like the red blood cells will start to accumulate in the veins that are heading back to the artery, because heading back to the heart, because they don't have enough pressure to push them through, and that would cause some kind of obstruction, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think like it's worth looking at. And also, I was kind of curious, like when he talked about what was that, like praying shrimp? Is it like a mantis shrimp?
Yeah.
Or pistol shrimp, as I like to call them, because they can cause huge cavitation when they kick their prey, so they can consume them.
Yeah.
Do you think like they have different rhodopsins that would enable them to detect a varying gamut of the EM spectrum?
Different forms of the protein? Yeah, I mean, possibly. I would imagine. I mean, I would imagine that they function pretty similarly. It's just some kind of mutation over time that happened to be advantageous or not disadvantageous. And so yeah, I mean, there's probably, I would bet that it's like essentially the same kind of cascade, but just slightly different like conformations.
Right. I mean, as far as we know, right? I mean, there are very limited samples of rhodopsins that you can associate that with kind of mutual evolution, where different kind of channel rhodopsins in different species have mutated to a same kind of level, even though like you have varying amount of speciation in between. But I'm just like curious, like how they're able to detect. I believe, like if I'm not mistaken, they can detect some part of UV light as well. Like,
yeah.
They have like a very huge range. I mean, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep. Yeah, it's pretty cool. I mean, it sort of, I suppose, makes sense, just given like the environment and the set of predators that they probably encounter, that being able to detect like just subtle variations in where a predator might be over you, when there's whatever, just with whatever light is available, it would sort of make sense. But yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I certainly don't know enough about like those actual like that biochemistry to like really speculate meaningfully. But yeah, I mean, it would make sense.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I just wanted to raise those things, like, because my mind was kind of racing as you were discussing those things, so that I had to just simply ask you about it.
Yeah, right on. Well, thanks for calling in, man. Always good to talk to you.
All right. Yeah, same here. All right, bye.
Take it easy. That's Abyss, everybody. Jeez, are you frozen? I thought so. Gosh, that's unfortunate. Let's see. Sometimes if I just give it a little bit more time, it'll pop back up. So, but hopefully it's recording this, so maybe I can just like, are these COVID-related neuro questions only? No, not necessarily. Whatever comes to mind. In fact, we haven't really talked very much about COVID today. We talked a little bit, but not very much. Not as much as I have in the past. Hey, Kathy. Not on anyone's side. Well, crap. Great balls of fire still looping. Jeez, that's so irritating. Sorry, everybody. I don't really know. It is sort of a frustrating thing about the app is like, let's see what happens if I... Yeah, I'm even frozen on my computer. Let's see. Yeah, it still has me connected to Abyss. That is so frustrating. How long has it been? Maybe... Okay, are we looking a little bit better now? Oh, wow. It's so dark in here. Maybe I can focus on fixing that while we're at it here. Jeez. Let's do... Yeah, it's a little better. Okay. Yeah, jeez. It looks like maybe we are out for the count. That would be unfortunate. It hasn't been that long. And I didn't even really get to talk about the YouTube video that I did. I wonder if I do this. Okay, I'm going to try an experiment. Let's see. Oh, wait, no, you do it this way. Boom. Now, let's see. No. Oh, duh, yeah, oh my god. Let's see. Will it reconnect? No. No. Maybe I should just start a new one. Why don't we do that? Oh, are we connected? No, let's just start a new one. Yeah. Let's just do that. Do that. And let's try. Sorry, this is very, very intriguing content, I'm sure. Come on, buddy. Jeez, this is so frustrating. No. Ugh. No. Boom. Man, that is so frustrating. Food. Hashtag brain. Oh. All right, now let's see. This is a new one. So my name is Ian McLaughlin, and I have a PhD in neuroscience from the University of Pennsylvania. And on YouTube, earlier today, I talked about a study that explored whether the same neurons that drive people to consume delicious food, ice cream, pie, my delicious, world famous McLaughlin carrot ring, or for Christmas, my world famous McLaughlin persimmon bread, are those the same dopamine neurons that drive people to consume drugs like cocaine? Specifically, they studied cocaine, but nicotine, alcohol, opioids, they would all be included in this collection. So that's at youtube.com/anthropoid, which is still live. You'll be able to catch my very awkward process of having to restart a stream because it, for some reason, pooped out on me. So we'll see if this works out. It might. I suspect that whatever went wrong last time might go wrong again. But that's too bad because I lost all the excellent points that people were bringing up. It's very frustrating. So how's it going? Welcome back. Likewise, Manti Forever. And I think somebody was even trying to call in. Thumpers! What's up? Yeah. I wonder if maybe there's an easy way for me to... Let's try this. Now we're cooking with some brain cells with our noggin. Let's see. Lost my connection. I listened to your one sentence 10 times. It was a good one. Yeah. This is known for some pretty good sentences. Connection suffered from tryptophan overload. Yeah, you know, so on the YouTube I got into that whole like turkey tryptophan making you drowsy myth, and it's not as simple as I think a lot of people say, where it's like it's completely wrong, because there is some validity to it, but it's not the turkey that's the critical component there. It's not the active ingredient, really. I mean, it is, but it's not the main driver. So yeah, you can check that out. YouTube.com/anthropoid. Oh, and I went back to the reason I bring this up is that you might find interesting is that I looked into some papers from like back in the day, like decades ago, where they basically showed in Slice, I think, that tryptophan concentrations vary in brain slice according to other dietary components like you know, carbohydrates, and like the effect of insulin and on the ratios of branched chain amino acids compared to tryptophan and tyrosine. So it's pretty cool. Hello, Irene. Oh wait, is this the current one? No, that's the old one. Okay. Can you see CRISPR being used in your field? Yes, in fact, we've already used it. So for my PhD, we used CRISPR to design a mouse line that specifically, you know, so nicotine. The only reason people enjoy nicotine is because it is able to gain entry into the brain and then bind receptors that typically bind acetylcholine. And so these acetylcholine receptors are handily or conveniently called nicotinic acetylcholine receptors, and they are all throughout your brain. They're some of the oldest, evolutionarily oldest receptors in our brain, and it is thought that in fact they are the ancestor of serotonergic receptors. That's just a theory. I don't know how widely embraced it is, but anyways, so nicotine binds nicotinic acetylcholine receptors. You can think of a nicotinic acetylcholine receptor as like a pentagon, right, where each corner is a little column. Right, and so you can, if you remove one of those columns, you can kind of monkey around with how any given receptor is going to work. And so we made a line that lacked one of those columns, and then we could see like, oh, so is it, you know, this specific kind of acetylcholine receptor, nicotinic acetylcholine receptor, that is responsible for the reward of nicotine, or for, and not just nicotine. We also explored with cocaine and stuff. So yeah, we definitely used it. Now, I suspect most people, when they say like came to will we ever use CRISPR, they're actually interested in the like a clinical application, and that is definitely on the horizon. Like, there's no question. I don't think it's being used right now, but for sure, like specifically, I think initially it'll be, and I'm sure I'm right about this, but initially it'll be for monogenic diseases, so diseases that are caused by an aberrant form of one specific gene. But it could also be like muscular dystrophy would be one great example, because we know like where in the genome we would have to target, and CRISPR is very, very good at targeting specific parts of the genome, editing genes. Yeah, exactly. And muscular dystrophy is just like one that's kind of most widely available. But like, for example, Rett Syndrome, which I happen to bring up all the time because I spent a fair bit of time in one of the progeny labs of the person who discovered really the cause of Rett Syndrome, which used to be thought to be a form of autism, but it's slightly distinct. And what distinguishes it from, one of the things that distinguishes it from autism, apart from the symptoms and sort of the manifestation, is autism is associated with dozens, hundreds, sometimes even claimed to be thousands of genes, whereas Rett syndrome is derived from an aberrant form of one specific gene called MECP2. And so with CRISPR, you could theoretically, edit that gene when when it's still at its embryonic stage, and then therefore, basically edit that person's genome forever, and solve that problem if you were so inclined. So yeah, I mean, it's theoretically, it will eventually be used, but it is sort of a precarious kind of state of affairs, which is part of the reason for why Jennifer Doudna, actually one of my good friends now, works in Jennifer Doudna's lab. He's like killing it. His name is Enrique Lin Xiao, and he's brilliant. But anyways, she is so cautious in how she sort of markets CRISPR, but she sort of explains CRISPR, and she's like part of a board of, group of scientists in the United States who are like, these are some sort of like a bill of CRISPR rights that we should have. So yeah, I look for like Peter Petrelli from Heroes. You're the first person that's ever said that. I used to get that all the time, particularly in high school when Heroes was on TV, and I was dating a girl who was like sort of smaller, not super short, but like shorter than me and blonde. And so like we constantly got that. There's a character in Heroes who's like a small, I say keeps like small, like just a young cheerleader. Why would someone have extreme dissociation episodes after she tried a drug about a month ago? Julie, very interesting topic. So, first of all, any mind-altering substance will affect people in different ways, right? So, I think that there is a suspicion. Oopsies. There's a suspicion that like a drug is a drug no matter who's taking it, and so it's always going to have like the same effects, and that's just not how it works, right? There's something called pharmacogenetic differences in how people respond to drugs, and so here, let's just do this. This is irritating. Boop. Whoa. Sorry, I'm monkeying around with my YouTube video settings. Okay, that's acceptable. So pharmacogenetic differences. So for example, I think that the most sort of intuitive and overt example is how different people respond to opioids. So, some people when they take oxycodone or whatever, oxycodone, heroin, hydrocodone, not heroin. Most people don't just take heroin, but, oxycodone, hydrocodone, in OxyContin and Vicodin, and so on. When a lot of people take it, they feel awful. They feel nauseous. They feel dizzy. They feel dysphoric, the opposite of euphoric. Whereas when other people take those drugs, they feel excellent. They feel euphoric. They'll say things like, I've never felt this normal. I finally feel normal. Or I've never felt, this creative, or this, blah, 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 like a bunch of positive kind of reactions. And so those are completely different reactions to the same molecule. Well, at least part of the reason for that is that we have different genes that encodes the parts of the brain that respond to these kinds of drugs. So all of this to say that, why somebody might have a sustained sense of dissociation after any given drug, first of all, will involve how their unique genetic, predispositions respond to any given drug. Now, different drugs will have slightly different propensities to induce these types of reactions. Just to give you an example, like one of the sort of classic warnings about cannabis that people bring up is that it can, it's oftentimes misstated as saying it can cause schizophrenia. That's not true. But what it can do is precipitate schizophrenia in somebody who's vulnerable to it or predisposed to it, and it seems to do so at a higher frequency than other drugs, although other drugs do it too. Stimulants like amphetamine, alcohol, psychedelics, they all are associated with the conversion over to like schizophrenia or something like that, but cannabis is just statistically greater, but that's a minority of people, right? It's a very small proportion of the total cannabis using population, particularly these days. But so what distinguishes, why is it that some people would respond to cannabis exposure with schizophrenia, whereas, most people who smoke it, they never, or eat it or whatever, get exposed to it, they never really, there's no significant negative reaction at all. It has at least something to do with the unique genes that those people who do respond with psychosis and schizophrenia have. And we know some of those genes, like for example, a SNP, or a single nucleotide polymorphism in a gene called COMT, or catechol O-methyltransferase. Don't worry about all these words, but a unique form of this enzyme seems to be very highly associated with people who do respond to psychosis or cannabis with psychosis and schizophrenia. That's just one gene. Another one is like what is it? D8, not GAG. What is it? 2DG or something like that. Another enzyme. And so you have these unique forms of these genes, and that seems to predict for how people will respond. Well, same goes for if, you've reacted to a drug like, let's say, a psychedelic or ketamine, which is, becoming a bit more, widely used, or, whatever, psychedelics, ketamine, whatever. It can be cannabis. Is that, you may have had, or this person, I don't know if it's you, might have had a predisposition to psychosis or dissociation derealization, these sort of psychiatric conditions. And it just so happened that pretty much any mind-altering substance would have done the job, but whatever drug, was involved happened to be the one, right? So that's largely why, because of individual differences and the unique genes that one has received, one has inherited. Another thing is past life experience. So it turns out that some people who experience childhood, adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. Thank you very much for the super hearts. I appreciate that. That they, depending on how frequently those traumatic experiences occur, things like child abuse, physical abuse, neglect, these types of things. Depending on the frequency, people become more and more predisposed to experiencing psychosis later on in life. And it turns out that when it comes to addiction, a huge proportion of people seeking clinical treatment for addiction, something like 80%, have had some form of childhood trauma. And so, it could just be the case that past life experiences, severe traumatic experiences back, earlier on in life, are, predisposed that person to responding to essentially any mind-altering substance with dissociation. Yeah, traumatic experiences, the relationship between traumatic experiences and dissociation is quite an interesting, complicated one. Thank you very much for the super heart, Jerry, I believe, is how you likely pronounce that. I really appreciate it. It's very generous of you. Oh, Lord, some of these comments. Yes, it's the internet. Why do Republicans consume more methamphetamines, and alcohol than other party members? I don't know if that's true. I'm not so sure. And methamphetamine isn't quite as well, I guess actually recently I think it is becoming more popular again. But there was a time in the nation's history where there was a lot of methamphetamine being consumed, but not. I would bet you my favorite pen that there is not a very significant effect of party affiliation on drug use. Although, it would be an interesting study. I would find that study interesting. I think it would be basically impossible to conduct, but I would find it interesting. Speaking of politics, I did speak about the biology of political predispositions on my youtube.com/anthropoid, a couple weeks ago. Okay. Let's see. How does lack of human interaction affect the brain? George, that's a great topic. Very negatively. So, humans, like most other primates, are highly social primates. We just, so separation or isolation from human interaction can be extremely debilitating. And this is true even in like chimpanzees, where if a chimpanzee is isolated from its troop, I think it's called the troop, they develop, what would equate to psychiatric abnormalities or conditions. Depression, they'll pick at their hair or their fur. I don't really know if it's called a hair on a chimp, but these types of psychiatric conditions can arise in humans who become isolated. But even beyond those psychiatric conditions, the more proximal likely ramifications of isolation, dementia is associated with increased social isolation. So people, as they get older, can sometimes, particularly in the United States, become a bit more isolated from their family who've moved or taken care of their own families, and so as a result they don't end up going out to bars and stuff like that, wherever they used to socialize, and so they become isolated, and that is highly associated with increased risks of dementia. So it has a myriad effects on mental health and cognitive health as well. So yeah, it's one of those things that I think is underestimated in terms of how important it is. Sort of like sleep. Like I think my sense growing up is that like sleep was considered to be like either a luxury or just like something that weak people did. Like we would always brag like, oh my god, I got like no sleep. This is true in science too, by the way. Like scientists always say that kind of stuff to each other. It's obnoxious, whether it's true or not. But anyways, yeah. So social interaction is critical throughout life. Which is, by the way, one of the reasons I am so concerned about the effect of COVID, not infection, but just COVID in general on my baby's development. So my daughter is just under 2 years old. She's almost 2 now. And at this age, she would be typically like playing with other babies, interacting, maybe, being made fun of, whatever, having to respond to these social challenges, these situations, and she's just not doing that. I think that there's going to be long-term consequences of that. Do you consider it a gateway drug? I assume you're referring to cannabis. So the whole gateway drug theory that had been around for a long time, and still some people subscribe to it. But the reality is, there's no evidence to suggest that cannabis is a gateway drug. And frankly, if we were like to seriously consider public health as a function of like regulating gateway drugs, it would be nicotine. Nicotine and alcohol are the gateway drugs. It's just like you can't argue against that. But for me personally, I just don't think it's a particularly useful framework, just because who cares? You know, the goal, at least my goal from a public health perspective, would not be to prohibit people from altering their states of consciousness. For me, I think that is just a dramatic incursion into our personal liberty, our personal, lives by the government, and it's not even based on any public health. So it's like doubly asinine, doubly obnoxious. So worrying about which drug somebody did first, it's an inconsequential concern for me. All right. As a neuroscientist, do you get many girls? Well, I am married and I have a daughter, so I have 2 girls in my life. Well, and I have other women with whom I interact. Okay. Do you think social interaction is necessary for the maintenance of immune systems? Yeah, totally. So, when you say like maintenance, like let's just reframe that a little bit. And good to see you, by the way, Usama. But if you reframe that to like optimally functioning immune system, like it's not like social interaction will like make sure that you have sufficient B cell proliferation in germinal centers or like whatever T cells in the thymus. Rather, it's that the anxiety, stress, the chronic stress that can arise from social isolation has its own effect on, take it easy, Abyss. Thanks for calling in, as always. Has its own effect on the immune system. Specifically, it's immunosuppressive. So through the release of glucocorticoids like cortisol, which is immunosuppressive, well, it's anti-inflammatory. That renders the immune system just less primed, right? It's constantly sort of being held back a little bit by this glucocorticoid, this elevated glucocorticoid concentration. So that's a great an example for that is I taught a recitation. Basically, it was like a class for like 26 to 28 kids, college kids, and there's midterms, there's finals, and you always like if you were plopped into our the lab where we did our class, and you just saw like the faces of all the kids, the young people, you would see, hey, there's like, it's weird how many like people, if you just took 2 samples, one like right in the beginning of the year, or like let's say 3 weeks into the year, and like one a couple days before midterms and then before finals, you would see, it'd be like, weird, it seems like there's a lot more herpes, more herpetic lesions on the face at this time. I wonder what that's about. And it's because they're so stressed that their immune system is insufficiently surveilling for the resurgence of the herpes that's latent in them, that they've had for years probably, that most people have, and so as a result they lay dormant in sensory ganglia, like right up in your head basically. And then when the immune system is off the it's off its game because it's being suppressed by stress, those viral particles can escape and then go infect your skin, so that then you begin shedding bioparticles and give it to another person, which is why we have so many. That's why so many people have it. Anyways, yeah. So that's how I would think about it. 2 girls is probably enough. Yeah, for sure. I think that we have a sufficient concentration of estrogen in this apartment. Yeah, I heard you liked BOFA. What is BOFA? Bank of America? Wait, BOFA, is that a game? Game. Am I being such a dork right now? I'm probably being such a dork. Oh, got it. Oh, that's funny. Hey, what's going on? Here we go. I know you were going with that NyQuil. Very funny, very funny. Never kiss anyone with a cold sore. Yeah. What is your YouTube channel again? It is youtube.com/anthropoid. So you could, you can just search like anthropoid brain, right? Anthropoid neuroscience, the 2 easiest words to spell in the English language. I am not a marketing surgeon. I'm a neuroscientist. YouTube.com/Anthropoid. Thank you for asking. Yes, I've seen documentaries on monkeys. Sad, yeah. I want to listen to your voice, though. Yeah, somebody wants to call in. We can hear their voice. Thank you so much for the super heart. Phil, I assume that's your name. Thanks, appreciate it, man. Raised by psychotic wolves. Can you be a con scientist? You are way too good at communicating for a scientist. No, that's not true. I think that's a stereotype that's not true. A lot of scientists are very good at communicating. It's just I think that they speak to rooms of other scientists, so they can just rely on, when I say the knack, like literally I just say the knack in a lab like ours, you would know specifically that what's in my bio now. That's right. You can find my YouTube channel. Thank you, Joy, by going to my Periscope profile page and just tap that, click that, however you interact with your device, and it'll take you there. Thanks for reminding me about that. So when I say the knack in my lab, most people will be like, "That? What are you even talking? A knack? What do you have a knack for?" But what that means in a neuroscience lab is the nucleus accumbens, NACC. Some lazy scientists spell it NAC, and that is just wrong. Anyways, it's an aesthetic thing, but yeah. I'm a broke student. I could have given you super hearts. Oh no, you shouldn't feel obligated at all. Are there measurable neurological markers of an addict's brain? Evolver Man. Excellent question. The short answer is right now, there is no clinical protocol for doing that, like with an fMRI, for example, detecting differences in patterns of brain activity. However, there is plenty. Just because something isn't used in the clinic doesn't mean that it's not possible, and that it's not like possible today. Like we could do it today. Here's why I say that. What's going on? Whoa. Okay, I'm gonna stop breaking things. So just to give you an example, like I know that there were studies that were coming out of my program, the cognitive neuroscience. I was more of a circuits guy, but of the cognitive people, where they were doing that. They were able to predict with, everybody was anonymized, and they could predict who was a control brain, somebody who was not addicted to anything, and then somebody who was. And, there's different markers. Probably the most intuitive or most likely. That's cool. Just drop my pen. Things are going great. Everything's falling apart. Everybody stay calm. Anyways, yeah. So there are what's called functional connectivity. So this is basically like what your brain is doing at rest, right? So in other words, like if one part of the brain becomes active, what other parts of the brain also become active or change in their activity. So just to give you a better example, like if one part of my brain called the ventral tegmental area becomes active, and this other part of the brain towards the front becomes active, that likely means that they're communicating with one another. That's called functional connectivity. It could be the opposite. It could be that when the VTA, when the ventral tegmental area becomes active, another part of the brain shuts up. And that means that there might be some other, communication between these two regions. It's called functional connectivity. So I remember seeing studies, I don't know if they were published yet, but where they could do that. They could predict whether or not somebody was addicted to a drug by their unique signatures of functional connectivity. But, there's that. But then, theoretical ones totally as well. Like you could probably, well, I'll give you an example that's quite different. So if I know the specific form of gene that you have, I was referencing this earlier, but specific form of gene for the alpha-5 subunit of the nicotinic acetylcholine receptor, if I know what form of gene you have, I can predict whether you do or don't smoke, but then also how much you smoke, when you started smoking, how severe withdrawal syndromes will be for you, if and when you try and quit. And then I can probably also predict whether or not you drink alcohol and then how much alcohol you drink. Just from that one gene. Now, it's not with 100% certainty, but it is shockingly good. So there are like diagnostic markers of addiction. But they're not used. Like they're not clinically used because they're not clinically that relevant. Would you allow your child to play a contact sport? No. No. And like, I'm not against children playing, sports like football, hockey, wrestling. These are like the most highly associated with traumatic brain injury, concussions and stuff. But I just think that parents and children, but parents need to be aware of the risk that they're taking when they play those sports. And if I had the genes of whatever, like a John Jones or whatever, like a LeBron James or something, if I was like really tall and whatever, like I might consider like what the potential payoff for developing that expertise and playing these sports at a young age is potentially quite great. Whereas for my children, none of my children do currently or will ever have the just the physics available to them to become a professional athlete like that in those sports. And so I might consider soccer, but even soccer is actually, I think, the most common cause of concussions in adolescent girls is soccer. But anyways, I would consider that, but I would go for like softball or baseball. I loved playing baseball, or tennis or these types of sports that just don't compromise or jeopardize your cognitive capabilities, because when it comes to somebody with my genes, those are the only capabilities that are going to be able to get you to the future that you want, right? So that's my perspective on it. And then specifically when it comes to like martial arts, if she gets really into martial arts, she or my future potential kids do, I wouldn't let them do like boxing or Muay Thai or something like that. I would try and convince them to go into like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or something. Hey, Joey Tribbiani. Hey. How you doing? That's what it is. How you doing? Sugar is really important for the brain. Oh, no, good to see you. I didn't see you in here. So when you say it's important, like carbohydrates are really important. So sugar is what's called a simple carbohydrate. And we call it simple because it's just like essentially one molecule or maybe two molecules attached to each other. Whereas complex carbohydrates are things like oatmeal, right? They're polymers of essentially the same molecules, meaning there's multiple of those molecules connected. And so as a result, it takes us longer to break down something like oatmeal or bread or things like that than it does for sugar. So sugar, but they all end up in the same place, the brain. And it's about 20-25% of carbohydrate or of caloric intake ends up in the brain. So sugar itself, there's really there's no good reason to eat sugar apart from the fact that it tastes good. Like that, and that's important. I mean, for sure, that's one of the reasons it's lovely to be a human. But there's no, like from a health perspective, there's no real justification for eating sugar. And in fact, there's quite a bit of downside to it. So I try and essentially never consume sugar unless it's really worth it, unless it's like, an apple pie at the end of Thanksgiving or, my world famous McLaughlin carrot ring or the next, the world famous McLaughlin persimmon bread that I make in Christmas. Those are worth it. But otherwise, there's really no good reason. Oh, and unless you're like a high performance athlete, like you're running or you're, just doing a lot of like cardiovascular, really just a lot of physical exertion, then sugar can be really useful because you can just burn it like that. It's available right away, whereas you don't have to rely on like breaking down this oatmeal, when you just need as much energy as you can get for the next 15 seconds, right? So, yeah. All right. How long has it been? Let's see. So I have a YouTube channel, everybody, youtube.com/anthropoid. Today I talked about whether or not the same dopamine neurons in the brain, as opposed to in a dish, in a brain, respond to cocaine that respond to food. So when you experience this delicious meal, my world famous persimmon bread, these are both my mom's, so like I didn't invent this. But anyways, when you eat something so delicious like that, you have an increase in dopamine, right? It's part of the reason that you enjoy this act of eating it. But then also whenever you do cocaine, as we all do, whenever people do cocaine, but then also smoke cigarettes, consume nicotine or alcohol or opioids, they also have this increase in dopamine. Are they the same neurons? I talked about that on YouTube, youtube.com/anthropoid. If you enjoy that topic, go diving a little bit more deeply into these topics, why don't you can probe or prod or tickle or flick the subscribe button. I would appreciate that. And I have a podcast called Wired to be Weird, where we talk about all of these subjects, but in much greater depth. Yeah, of course. Hello, Nora. So you can check that out. Otherwise, I should call it a day, I think. So yeah, check out the YouTube. Let me know what you think. If you have any topics that you think would be fun to delve into, I'm all eyeballs. And oh, okay, here, wait. So I had a question about dopamine. Could lowering dopamine levels in the brain help eliminate? Oh, wired to be weird. Oh man, we're like left hanging on your dopamine question. 2020 is trash. Agreed. Bad year. As far as years go, it was bad. Let's see. Did we get it? No. Darn it. Okay. Could you tell that if I eat a burger, I will receive as much dopamine as from cocaine? Well, you're going to have to see the video, my friend. The short answer is no. It's not going to be as much dopamine. But there is dopamine that's released. So, yeah. YouTube.com/anthropoid. You could get to it through my profile page on Periscope. You just swipe, and then there's a link right there. Click it. Otherwise, thanks for hanging out, everybody. Sorry for the hiccup in the middle, and hopefully I will see you at some time this week. Would be optimal, but if not, then same time, same place next week. Be there next Sunday. And until then, have a great week. See you guys. All right, YouTube. Thanks so much for joining live, and please excuse that like horrifyingly just awkward middle section where I was having to type on my phone. I'm sure the camera was also vibrating. It's very irritating, I bet. So yeah, I'm all eyeballs when it comes to suggestions of how to make the channel better, but then also just topics. So just let me know. Otherwise, if you haven't, hit subscribe. If you're so inclined. Otherwise, have a great week. Thanks for watching. See you guys.